took me to the hospital, and you left to go to Rockwell to work your job. Levon was born at 10, around 10 in the morning, and you didn't get to see him until about 8 that night, 7:30 to 8 that night, when you got off your job. Anyway, he was born May 28, 1943. And I looked at the clock on the wall that tells the time in the delivery room, and it was 10:40 a.m. And I said, a boy or a girl? The doctor said, a fine big boy. About 30 minutes later, back in my room again, the nurse brought him to me, and my heart swelled with love and pride when I first beheld my son, Levon Barry. He was sweet and fat, with dimpled wrists and chubby hands, though of course his complexion was sort of pink. To me, he was very cunning, with a broad little face and a lot of black hair. And on his forehead there was a speckled V for victory. As I held my little boy, immediately I forgot that I had hoped for a little girl. After seeing him once, I knew that I would know him from all the other babies. In the hospital, I counted the hours between the feedings, and I counted the days until I could take him home and share him with Nelson and Franklin. And one day at feeding time, a nurse came in with a homely little fellow in her arms. "Here's your baby, Mrs. Page," she said. "That's not my baby," I said. "Oh, yes, it is," she tried to convince me, but I wouldn't be convinced, so she consulted the baby's bracelet and decided perhaps I did know my own son after all. We came home from the hospital, and Levon was a perfect baby for 1 week. From then on, his voice, raised in song, became a familiar sound. We found he was hungry, so we gave him to drink. He was getting used to a lot of attention, and from then on it was always a guess to us as to how much of his troubles were mental and how much physical. Regardless of how much attention he got in the daytime, he slept like a log at night, so we didn't lose sleep with him. At 6 months old, Barry had a cold which caused an ear infection, and those fine nights of sleep we'd been giving disappeared. Oh, well. Do you remember the night we met in the dining room at Pfeiffer?
Oh yes, I remember at which table I was sitting.
I think that's the first time I saw you. And you look like a scared rabbit.
We'll go back a little farther. When I went in that dining room, there was 9 tables. And the most favorite looking table was a big table in the middle. So I went to that table, and I hadn't more than walked up to the table and taken a place till a man stepped beside me and says, "Unless you move over to this table." So he took me to another table, and that's where you say you saw me.
You tried to sit at the faculty table.
It was the best looking, it was the best looking one.
I was going to ask you why you weren't allowed to sit at that table.
The faculty table. But all that year you went with another girl, my roommate, Ruby.
Well, you had a boyfriend too named Healy.
Now, who was this Ruby?
Ruby was a girl down there. She was my roommate, actually.
Mm-hmm.
She was from the mountains of North Carolina.
She was from Whittier.
And she came out here to see us a few years ago, just within the last few years.
Oh, we had a lot of fun together that year I was there. Of course, I was only there 1 year, and she stayed 2 years later.
So there were only 9 tables for the whole...
But I will refer to one thing that happened. It was the custom in the dining hall that every night a Bible was taken to one student, for that student to read the scripture and have a little prayer. The list was put out ahead of time, but I forgot to check the list on one occasion. And we were sitting there at the tables, and just as we finished supper, I was sitting there just as relaxed as could be, and the head waitress from the faculty table went and got the Bible. And lo and behold, she came right smack to me and put that Bible down in front of me. I read something, but I don't know what it was, where it was from.
I bet you read whatever happened to fall over.
Whatever happened, it fell. When I opened it, whatever showed, that's what I read.
Oh, anyway, It was, what, a year later before you ever came on your first date?
I graduated in May of 29, and the first time I was with you was in February of 1930. I had gone up to Mitchell for a Washington birthday party and driving Dad's T-model Ford, and somehow or other you and I got side by side, and I believe that I took you to Liberty.
Right.
That was the first time we were together, February of 1930.
And we got married in 1934. So that was a drawn-out courtship.
We became engaged, if I remember correctly, the latter part of 1930. We got to talking about it. But it took me that long to work and get enough money to buy the license and pay the preacher a little something, and for you to get your baby brothers and sisters up where they could take care of
My
themselves.
mother had died, and I just felt like I had to stay home a few years.
So we were married on December the 23rd, 1934, and I gave in the Methodist parsonage in Gold Hill, Reverend J.P. Morris. I gave him $2, and that was almost a day's work.
Tell them what you wore.
Well, previous I had made me a shopping list, and I went shopping to Belk's department store in Albemarle. I bought a suit. What was it?
Sort of a charcoal gray.
Charcoal gray. That suit cost me $14, and that was a week's work, like in $2.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought one of the prettiest shirts. It was kind of a
That's what he thought.
a spotted shirt. That shirt was that was prized
It was a
possession.
houndstooth check, black and white. Houndstooth check to get married in.
Well, I like that shirt.
He liked it so well that after we got married, every weekend he wore that shirt. One weekend I didn't wash it and it was dirty, and he came in on Sunday, "Where is my shirt?" He really liked that wedding
Well,
shirt.
let's back up to the wedding. We were married at 5 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. We left the Methodist parsonage in Gold Hill and came to Salisbury, parked in front of St. John's Church and listened to the chimes while supper was being fixed, and we went out to Calhoun Street and had supper with Lib and Luther.
While we were sitting listening to the chimes.
Calhoun Street?
Calhoun Street.
Where is that?
It's in the southern part of Salisbury.
Where you went and played when Jerry was a little boy.
Mhm.
Do you remember going to Jerry's house out here in town?
I had forgotten about them living in town.
You were thinking they lived down the country all the time.
Now, when did they move to Liberty?
Early part of 47.
Well,
You
I
were
mean,
just
after all,
young.
I was pretty young.
Right.
One of my earliest memories of them was the time when you remember when Nelson and the other kids were playing in the basement over there and the glass exploded?
Yeah. That was
When do you-
down,
That was down at Liberty, but
Right.
when would you guess that was? I guess that was probably 1950 or later.
You
wasn't it?
stayed with Lib while we went to the convention in Havana, Cuba in the spring of 1947.
It could have been then.
And they had
We were
moved.
not there
They
then.
had moved to Liberty just a short while before that.
No, I think it was later than that.
Well,
I think it was
And
later than that.
then you stayed with Lib and Luther in the spring of 1948 when we went to the convention in New York.
Yeah.
But let's back up a little bit. After we had supper with Lib on the evening of our wedding, we went back past Dad's, and I picked up a few more pieces of clothing. Went on to Albemarle and spent our first night in the house on Peanut Hill where we were living. The house cost me $8 a month rent. I got up on Monday morning. I had to be at work at 20 minutes till 7.
So you got married on Sunday?
Married on Sunday, and I
You
went
had
to
to go to
work
work
at
at
20 minutes till 7 on Monday morning.
Long
And that
night
was the
ago.
day before Christmas, and we were in a retail grocery that had big business that
You
day.
had to work on Christmas Eve, the day after you were married.
I worked till 10 o'clock that night on Christmas Eve. And
Did you get Christmas Day off?
as we were closing up that night, the boss man says, says, you're gonna need it. Says, take off the rest of the week. So I didn't go back to work until the next Monday. But when he started to pay me off for that week's work,
Sit up here looking like you're looking at the
he
ceiling.
says, you're gonna have extra expense, I'm gonna raise you. I had been making $16 a week and he raised me to 18.
I see. Okay, that's Paul.
We started keeping house right behind the store. And Daddy said he paid $8 a month, was it? Rent. And
Right behind the grocery store?
right behind the grocery store where he worked. We didn't even have running water. The whole village back there got their water from a well, and it was down the hill from our house, so I had to carry all the water from a well down the hill.
Now, was this a fairly major grocery store as far as Albemarle was concerned, or just a little community store?
It was an outstanding privately owned store.
In its day, but nothing like a supermarket now.
I'm just trying to think of what to compare it to.
Well,
Was it say comparable to the Macomb store in Faith, maybe?
very much so. And we had one addition. There were three of us. Each one had a route. We'd get in there about a little before 7 o'clock of the morning and check to see what we had in stock coming in for fresh vegetables that day. And each person would take his route and take orders and bring those orders back into the store, and then we'd fill them and deliver.
The route you mean for delivery purposes?
Yes,
Well, they took the
Each
orders and
salesman
then went back and
had
filled
so
them.
many streets. For instance, one man would go up on the West Cassett knitting mill hill, and there were three boys. Now I didn't have a regular route. I was a substitute order taker for the three. Whichever one was out, I had to fill in for him.
Was that real common back then for people to have their groceries delivered at home?
Oh yes, and 90% of our business was sold on credit. And the cotton mills paid off every 2 weeks.
Did you go by the stores and get the orders before you went and filled them? Or how did they get the
Well,
orders?
I went past the store and verified what he had coming in the way of fresh vegetables could be sold that morning. And we went and took the orders.
Well, that's what I thought. You
after
took
we
the
had-
orders on one trip and filled them on another.
Yes, after we had taken the orders, well then we came back and they were filled and delivered.
Which was a rare form of service. I mean, to think of now, it would be a very ridiculous thing,
I don't
really.
know of any store that has a full delivery service like we practiced then.
That's the only one I had ever known, too.
And I would be afraid now to do. We went in delivering groceries. We never knocked at the back door. You went to the back door and right into the kitchen. You went with the groceries and put them on the table and got out of the way. And on
Did you ever catch any women?
well, on one occasion on North 2nd Street, I was delivering groceries, and I grabbed my pan up into the back door. I went into the kitchen, and as I went into the kitchen, it sounded like an explosion. Something went across that kitchen floor in front of me and dodged behind the door, and I found out later it was a woman taking her rub-down bath.
So you're not joking when you said you just went headed into the kitchen and didn't knock on the door?
Didn't knock, you went to the kitchen, and the object was to get those groceries delivered.
I see.
We had no bathroom. We had an outdoor Johnny. The house did not have one closet in it, not one single closet. And we had a little 2-burner oil stove and a tiny little wood stove. So I had cooking on either wood or oil. Of course, we burned our own wood. I had our wood stove and burned wood. And then after that, the next place we lived.
We were married on December of 34, and along in the fall of 35, we moved, we only moved about 200 or 300 feet, but we went from the Peanut Hill Road over to the highway and moved in a white house, which was a nice house.
We moved out of the slum area into the better section, although it was just backyards practically joined.
Now, what was the reason for that move? Were you just feeling like you could have...
Better house.
And was
Better
it...
house with water?
No, it didn't have water, but it had a well on the back porch.
I mean, that's a pretty big improvement in your standard of living.
Oh,
Was it
yes.
just that you could afford it and it was
Yeah,
time to move?
it came empty.
Is that what his raise from $16 to $18 a week did?
And I had that house was owned by a man who lived out on Salisbury Mill Hill in Salisbury. Mr. Bowers owned that house to which we moved. And my stipulation was, it was a house that was almost arranged so 2 couples could live in it. And it was understood that as long as just she and I were there, I paid him $8 a month. But if I got anybody to move in the other side, I had to pay him 10. And Mamie's sister and her husband moved in for a while with us
Nellie
there.
and Jack lived in the other side.
And I had to pay him $10 a month while they were living there.
So we had a well on the back porch, and the house was really a fairly decent little house. It was much nicer house than the one we had been in. Fairly decent even by today's standards, except it didn't have bath and running water. We had electricity, of course.
Both of them.
And then we left there.
We stayed there till October 1936. I finished my last day's work at the H&L Grocery on Saturday night about 10 o'clock of October the 10th, 1936. Came to Salisbury and went to work for the Life Insurance Company of Virginia on Monday morning, October 12th, 1936.
He remembers all the statistics. I don't remember any of the statistics. I just remember the kind of places we lived.
Well, we moved, when I came to work in Salisbury on October the 12th, in November, I found a house, 213 South Lee Street, in which one side of it was open. And I rented that house and moved in 213 South Lee in November of 1936 and stayed there till February of 1939.
But we lived with Nellie for about 6 weeks waiting for the house
Yeah, we stayed with her. I slept on a bed out in the hall upstairs.
on Bank Street. We lived for about 6 weeks waiting for the house on Lee Street to come empty.
424 East Bank.
And that was a duplex.
Uh-huh.
And we took one side of it, and Nelson was born there. One of the things I remember most about that house, I don't know why I should remember it, but it was the event when Orson Welles gave his speech, and the nation sort of went berserk over
That was in 39, wasn't it?
the people from, we lived in that house.
Is 39 right for that day?
We moved away from there in
I guess
February
Nelson was born in
1939.
November 38.
Uh-huh.
And that's, I don't know why I remember that so distinctly, being in that living room and hearing Orson Welles.
You actually
I
heard
guess-
it?
Oh, yes. I guess it must have impressed me, or I wouldn't remember it that
You
way,
must have.
In
What
Feb-
was that thing Orson Welles was talking about? The men from outer space.
It was the War of the Worlds,
War
wasn't
of
it?
the World, something of that sort.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it was a very,
Very dramatic
famous
occasion, right?
broadcast, yeah.
And that's one of the most dramatic things I remember about that place.
Well, we stayed there till February of 39 and moved 2 miles east of Salisbury, about halfway to Granite Quarry, in a house that Mamie's brother, Fred Frick, had built.
now, you had got your job at the insurance company through Fred, hadn't you?
Mm-hmm. But we moved to that house in February of 1939.
There comes the statistics.
I was paying him $13 a month rent, and everything was going good until along near the end of 1940, instead of telling me, he sent me kind of a business-like letter. Effective January the 1st, 1941, your rent will be raised from $13 a month to $16 a month. It made me mad, and I started hunting a lot. And
I never heard this story.
I bought an acre and 6/10 and a big wheat field just a couple hundred yards from where we were living. Bought an acre and 6/10 for $600, and arranged immediately to get the Brady family, John Brady, his son Dolph, and his son Herman, to start building a small house for me. The 2 senior carpenters, I paid 45 cents an hour, and the younger son, he got 35 cents an hour. And they built the house, and we moved in on the 31st day of May, 1941.
In the meantime, we rather felt that $600 was a lot to have invested in just land. So we decided if we could get a buyer that we liked or was satisfactory, we would sell off part of that acreage.
Mm-hmm.
So we offered 200 strip foot off of it.
100 wide, 100 wide.
100 wide, all the way back for $200. And our neighbor, Mr. Barringer, said that was just too much. That we were talking to him about it. And he said that was too much. He didn't think
Land just wouldn't
He
command
said
that
it would never
value.
be worth it.
never be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we wouldn't sell it for that same 100-foot strip. What would you take for it now?
Well, as long as I'm going to live here, it isn't for sale, period.
Oh, then we had to leave for a while and go to Greensboro.
In September of 1944,
Now, was that sort of an involuntary job transfer?
the company
Oh,
offered me a
that's
promotion
right.
to go to
You had the
Greensboro.
right to turn it down.
But it's kind of hard to turn down, isn't it?
Well, I
Well-
had turned one down to Asheville previous to that,
Uh-huh.
and when the home office, when the company offered me this, and the manager says, now, if you ever expect a promotion, you better take it, because if you keep turning them down, they'll quit offering them.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that promotion to service as staff in Greensboro in September of 1944.
Boy, the place we lived in Greensboro. You
508
you
Golden
remember-
Court.
You remember it, Levon?
I don't have any remembrances of that.
Well, you were so little,
Mhm.
but it was a slum area, really.
Mhm.
The house was atrocious.
Slum area
They-
me, it cost me $35 a month.
The house was an old thing with ceiling.
Now, what happened with this house then?
We rented it to Jess and Margaret while we were gone.
For the whole time?
Right. But the ceilings were just old weather boards,
Mm-hmm.
and when a storm came up or a high wind blew, all the clothes in the closet would just get sifted with a black sooty silk. Even your clean clothes hanging in the closet just got a shower of sooty silk because the top of the closet was just that open.
Mm-hmm.
And you were just a little fella. You were, let's see,
We moved there in September of 44.
44. So you were less than 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a dirty place. Boy, you'd get messed up in the cold soot and stuff. And we only stayed there about a year.
We moved there in September of 44, and sometime along in the late summer of 45, I had a chance to buy a house out on Princeton Avenue near Pomona. And we bought that house and moved in the fall of 45.
That was a pretty nice house, and the night we moved in, all of us were quite thrilled because it was really, really a step up from where we'd been. And I asked Nelson how he liked his new home, and he said, well, says, wherever the family's together and we got our junk, that's home. But Franklin's job was unsatisfactory in Greensboro. We weren't really happy there because his job was a constant pain in the neck, and it was for that reason that we decided to come back to Salisbury.
Came back to Salisbury in January of 1946.
I think the truth of the matter is, too, we were always a little homesick for this place. We never were really.
Yeah. Well, you hadn't been in it that long before you had to leave it.
And our roots were still really pretty much planted here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came back here. You give the statistics when we came back, if you already done that.
We came back here in January of 46, but Jess was in the house and he had bought him one. He couldn't get access. He was having trouble getting his house so he could move in. And we stayed with Nell at Liberty for about 2 months, till March of 46, and we moved back in our house.
Mm-hmm. And I said when we moved back in, I said, now you can move as much as you want to from now on. If I ever move again, it's going to be up and not sideways anymore. So I have never moved again. We've never moved
We
again.
moved back in January of 46, and either the summer of January of 46 or 47, I put the room on the back of the house, which we call the playroom, and added one more room. And then in the early part of 1952, we built to the front of it and put on, enlarged the living room and put on an extra bedroom.
Now that construction I remember quite
It was
well.
in the spring of 52.
I have the
Spring of 53.
I have the vaguest of memory of the back room.
And we put out trees. When we bought this place, there was not a tree, a shrub on it. A wheat stalk was as big as any plant on the place. And so once we got the house in, we started putting out shrubs and trees. And the maples were put in fairly early, but then the pines were put up in 1950.
In the early 50s, somewhere.
54, I think most of them were.
Mm-hmm.
That's close anyway.
The little road that's the driveway and then goes on, was it there back when it was a wheat field, or was it just as a right of way?
It wasn't a road, it's a right of way.
It's a
Crawford Street.
It's a street, actually.
On the maps, it's a street.
30
Right.
foot
But
right.
was there any kind
There
of,
was a road there.
was there?
It was a rough road.
The wheat
right.
field just was beside the road.
That road did exist through there.
Mm-hmm.
It was then the line between Eliam and the farm, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And it went all the way to the Stokes Ferry Road then. Cars, it was rough.
really passable. Well, I can remember.
I can remember
driving
they went all the way
out.
through. They don't
It
anymore
was
at all.
not, very few of them ever went through there.
Well, nobody
They
now.
could.
Nobody
They
now knows
could.
there's a road there. I mean,
Mr.
even
Honeycutt quite
nominally.
often used it. But no, to look at it now, you wouldn't suspect
Nobody
that.
would guess there's a right of way.
No. So, that's the living quarters.
The earliest car that I remember was that old 1940 Plymouth, that black one. How much did you pay for that car?
$930. That was a deluxe model at that.
A deluxe model.
But let's back up. The first car I ever owned in the spring of 1933, I bought a 25 T-model Ford Coupe. Paid $37.50 for it.
That wasn't a new car, I think.
I kept that car till the spring of 1934, and I traded that T-model coupe for a 1929 A-model two-door sedan. I kept it from the spring.
Now, did you get these cars from individuals or?
The T-model Ford was bought from an individual.
Mm-hmm.
The two-door sedan was bought from a dealer in Albemarle. I kept that 29 A model until after I moved to Salisbury and went to work for the Life of Virginia.
Can you tell them when your children were born as good as you can tell them when you bought your car?
After I came to work in Salisbury in October, and in about 2 months I traded for a 1935 Chevrolet, 6-cylinder, straight transmission.
Mm-hmm.
But it had been wrecked, that I didn't know it, but it had been wrecked. I didn't keep it too long. I kept it to the spring of 1937, swapped it for a Willys.
That was a new car.
A new car with a little four-door in it, go for $667.
And when you went out on a dirt road, it just about strangled you to death.
It
The
was-
dust came right up through the floor.
Is that right?
Well, it was a jawbreaker. I bought it, and at the end of 2,200 miles, I had the first motor overhaul.
2,200.
2,200, they had to work on it some, and finally, after about 8,000, they had to rebuild the motor. I kept it to January of 1940 and swapped it for that Plymouth, 1940 model Plymouth.
I never heard of the Willys. Was it an independent manufacturer or was
It was a,
That's not. Is that the same as the Willys Jeep Company?
the Willys Jeep is probably a follower-up of it.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, in January of 1940, I traded the Willys for that 1940 Plymouth, which cost me $930. And
Now you kept it.
that was the only car I had until December of 1950, when Mamie was going to work and we needed 2 cars because she needed transportation.
You bought that Studebaker.
So I bought a 1951 two-door Studebaker Champion. Cost me $1,800, just a little over $1,800. So I was a 2-car man then. I kept the Plymouth until the fall of '54.
Was it that long?
Yeah, I kept the Plymouth that long. I had it 14 years and put 177,000 miles on it during the time I had it.
170.
A lot of difference between it and the Willys, wasn't it?
Yeah, I put
It really
170,
is.
but I had to have a new motor
Willys
put
was
in
a
it.
tiny car.
After 126,000, I had to have a new motor put in it. But I had 170,000 on it, and I swapped that Plymouth for a 1950 Buick 4-door sedan.
Blue one. I
Straight.
remember that one.
With a V8,
Bought it from
with,
Henry
with a
Mize.
straight 8 engine in it.
From Henry Mize.
Right.
Uh-huh. Well, I bought it from the Buick place. He had
I
traded
see.
it in. And then I kept it until, well, I swapped the Plymouth for it, and I had it and the Studebaker. Then I kept that Buick until October 1957 and traded it for a 1954 Buick.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Somebody
had
down near Liberty had Bond.
I traded with Bonds, but it had been owned by a guy who lived above Statesville.
I see.
And so then I had a 51 Studebaker and a 54 Buick. And then in the early part of '61, in the spring of '61, I traded that Studebaker for a 1960 Rambler.
That was the green one.
That was the little green one, yeah.
That was my favorite.
That was the best little car. It was a 6-cylinder, 128 horsepower engine, straight drive with overdrive.
That Rambler was blue. He's got you
Oh, we
convinced
got
it
another
was.
one. This is the last one he's talking about.
No, I'm talking about the first
talking
one
about
now.
the first
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry.
He's called. It's not green. It's blue.
Oh,
Yeah,
the second one was green.
The second one was
Oh,
green.
I
This
see.
is
We
the
got
first one.
confused on color.
Right.
He doesn't know green.
But see,
from blue.
I know. But see, that's what was funny because you said you're talking about the green one. He said yes.
Well,
So
I
that's the-
was, I was
blue
thinking of my Buick, my Ramblers. But
it's the old blue one
Right.
with the overdrive.
Right.
that little Rambler was, I could start from here to Umstead Hospital and it would just hang on 70 miles an hour from here to Durham. And
The green
never-
Rambler was your favorite one.
Right.
Yeah.
But-
yeah.
You didn't finish.
Well, we got him sidetracked on the color.
Yeah.
Well, the Studebaker is the one I traded for this little Rambler.
Right. And you kept that little Rambler till.
Yeah. Now you
Yeah.
go on until I bring it up to date.
All right, and then in 1966, the spring of 1966, I traded that 57 Buick to Woods Auto Company for a 1965 Ambassador.
That's the one
That's-
I like.
And I had 2 Ramblers, the little blue one and the green one.
Yeah.
And I kept that little 6-cylinder Rambler until I retired, and after I retired, Nelson needed another car, and he took it.
Right.
And I kept the Ambassador. And then in December of 1972, I bought the big Buick and kept the Ambassador until the spring of 75 and sold it.
You know what money you used? What did you use to buy this last Buick?
Oh, maybe I shouldn't say, but I used the money I inherited from Dad's estate.
Right. Squandered his father's estate.
His
His estate.
On this Buick I'm now
Inheritance.
driving.
Squandered his inheritance for a big Buick.
That Buick cost me $4,500.
That's been his favorite car.
Well, depends on what you want to use it for. To pull a trailer, yes.
And for comfort. You're always saying how comfortable it is.
Actually, you've had this Buick now for longer
Yeah, I
than
bought
any
it-
other primary car you've
I bought it
ever.
in December of
Oh.
The
72.
bigger Plymouth, except for the Plymouth,
Mhm.
because your Studebaker was not your primary car for a lot of those years.
Right.
And in fact, after you got the '54 Buick, you'd always got your
Mhm.
trips and things.
Mm-hmm.
We took that '54 Buick to what all trips?
We went to Florida when you and Danny were along. We were driving the 50 Buick then. That was the 50
But the
Buick.
'54 Buick you took to Montreal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It went to Montreal and, no, the 50 went to Montreal. The 54 went to Mississippi.
I don't argue with him on the car bit.
Mhm. Yeah, I drove that 50 Buick to Montreal. The riding hairs went with us.
I remember the longest drive I ever drove that '54 Buick was when you folks came to get me at Junaluska, and I remember I drove all the way home.
The 54,
Mm-hmm.
I'd lost
It was
track of
late,
that.
late one night. That's probably the time that we started to go to Junaluska and got there and found out I didn't pack my shorts. Remember that? We had to,
Stop by
had to
some-
go shopping in Asheville or somewhere to buy some shorts for me.
Do you remember
That
going
sounds
to?
characteristic of you, doesn't it?
Do you remember going to camp at Toccoa?
Sure.
I drove the 50 Buick and came after you there.
I
And there
remember the cars
was a
that-
couple other boys came back with us, but I've forgotten who they were.
When we went to Camp Toccoa,
Yeah, there was some.
to go on that trip, you had taken me up to what was the name of the church that Jess and Margaret go to?
Coburn.
Coburn. You had taken me up there to go with some kids from that church.
And I
So it
think
was
I
probably
brought them back.
right. It was probably Danny and
They
one or two other
transferred
kids
one
from
way.
that
Mhm.
church. When you folks met, when you were late teenagers, is that right?
We were both in school at Mitchell, predecessor to
Right.
Pfeiffer. That's where we met.
Yeah, but how old were you? I mean,
Well,
it
Franklin was
was high
about
school
19,
essentially.
I was 18.
18,
I was 18
And,
in March and went there in September.
and I was only 14 then.
Yeah. Was there much difference in your family background situation then?
He has always said there was, but in a way there wasn't.
There is to this extent. You live close to church, and your families were members of the Methodist Church, and you went to Sunday school from little up.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was not a member of any church. He was Primitive Baptist leaning, and we didn't live close to a church. And it's very few times that I was in church service up until I was a teenager.
hmm But we were both farm families.
Yeah.
Um,
I was the oldest of 6 children, and as soon as I was big enough to get between the plow handles, I started working with the mules.
Another thing, your family were sharecroppers
Yeah.
all your life. You were gone from home before your family lost the sharecropper status, weren't you?
That's right. Dad bought his first place in
But now-
1940 and moved to it.
Was that really indicative of lack of wealth, or was it just sort of indicative of the fact that there wasn't really much value attached to owning land? I mean, I can remember stories about people trading land for a mule, that sort of thing, where it gave me the impression it was almost considered higher status to own a mule than to own a piece of land.
I think it was probably just that Franklin's family had never felt that they really were able to own land, wasn't it?
Yeah, and my granddaddy Page never owned any land.
Also, sort of the fact that they were used to living this way and just didn't think too much about
Yeah.
trying to do any
But
different.
as far as actually hard conditions are concerned, their conditions growing up were not as bad as actually what you went through at times, was it?
Well, no, because both parents lived.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, mine would have been a bit better probably.
Do you think
Because
so?
we did own our home the whole time.
Mhm.
We never lived a sharecropper's life, which, you see, in a sharecropper situation, they had to turn in a fourth of the crop.
Dad, he had to give a fourth on the grain crop. He gave a fourth, and he paid to fertilize. On the cotton crop, he paid a fourth, and the landlord paid a fourth of the fertilizer bill.
So, you see, their labor was partly going for rent.
Yeah.
Where my dad owned his farm
Right.
from the beginning. He bought it before he was married.
Mm-hmm.
And so we never had that.
But in
But mine became much worse later, simply from the fact my mother died and left the family in such
Mhm.
rigid straits that we were in our or rather in my upper teenage years, we lived a harder life than Franklin's family ever knew.
Yeah. Now, did your dad ever have any other source of income besides his farming? Did he
He
ever?
was a rather proficient carpenter, and in off seasons from the farm, he did a lot of house building as just a hired carpenter. But he was a good carpenter.
He would hire on with somebody building.
Yes, he built a number of houses. He was kind of what you might say superintendent. He was the boss of that house, and practically every year, after the crops were laid by, say along about June or July, before gathering time, he was working on public work, and a lot of time in wintertime he would be doing that also.
Mm-hmm.
He did other little things too.
Mhm.
I heard Hoyle say that he even made axe handles for sale. Small
He
things.
was a good woodworker. As a matter of fact, Dad was pretty good in any type of work.
Now, your daddy did a lot of other kinds of things besides farming.
Yeah, my daddy was never really a born farmer. He was a good farmer when he tried, but
Mhm.
his heart wasn't in it.
Mm-hmm.
He had higher ambitions, or
Right.
thought he did.
Right. Now, I know he did. He trucked some.
Well, when they got married, he was farming.
Uh-huh.
He had bought the farm right there next to where my
Mhm.
mother grew up, and so they started off in fairly good shape and did well on the farm. It was never that he didn't do well on the farm.
He
But
just always
then-
thought he could do better.
Right, he always thought he could do better. The other side of the fence always looked better, or the side of the pasture.
Mm-hmm.
And they hadn't been married long before he started clerking. In fact, he had clerked some in a local store there in
Mhm.
Liberty, just a little country store.
Store up at the corner.
Uh-huh. And
It's essentially the same place as the store that Lib and Luther ran
right,
years ago.
right, it sat on that spot.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked in that off and on. And then I think for a few more years then he was just full-time farmer. And then he wanted to own a store of his own.
Mm-hmm.
So he ran a little store there in Liberty, not the place where he had originally worked, but about 100 feet down the road or 200 feet down the road from it. He didn't own the building, but the building was owned by his brother-in-law, Dolph Morgan, and Dad owned the stock and ran it completely.
Now,
He
what
just
kind
paid
of
rent.
store was that Mr. Meisenhammer ran down there? Wasn't there a feed mill or something that
Feed, yeah, there was. It's behind
Leo's
that-
father was that Leo's father that
Uh-huh,
ran there?
yeah. But this store is more down where John Lentz's store is now.
Oh.
Actually it's gone.
Yeah.
But it was across from my Aunt Carrie's house
Mhm.
there. And they owned the store building and the land, but my
Mhm.
daddy rented it and ran a store there, and he did real well in the store. And my mother helped in the store some. But there again, he soon felt that he could do better something else. So he wanted to go in the sawmill business.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was very much against that. I think my mother really was beginning to feel that he was not going to be satisfied with any one job.
Yeah.
Also, during maybe I'm backtracking here, but during the First World War, he left home a while and worked in Army construction, in Army barracks or Army camps of some sort. I don't know exactly what, carpenter work, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And was gone some during the First World War. But then he decided he wanted to go into sawmill business. And when my mother disagreed, this was, I think, the worst disagreement of their lives. And so it was at that point that he had some money saved up, and they had planned to build we were crowded. There were 8 children,
Mhm.
and we were very crowded in our house. And my mother wanted a new house and had drawn up plans and was already planning a new house. And they had money towards it. But when he went in the sawmill business, they struck an agreement. He would not, he couldn't seem to get that out of his system or mind. And so they made an agreement that she would relinquish the cash they had saved to him to go in the sawmill business if he would make the land in her name. And it was at that point that she secured the land in such a fashion that it would always be a place for her children to live. I really think by this time she was probably feeling that she would not live to be an old woman. And so that agreement was made. And then he went in the sawmill business down just out of Wilmington, North Carolina. And he lost everything he put into it, plus incurred some debt.
Do you know why?
Because he had a partner who was a crook, and my daddy was just taken for a ride and was too naive to see that he was being taken for a ride. My mother sensed it from the beginning. She sensed that he would be carried for a ride with this man, an airy man. But he came home from the sawmill in Wilmington broke, had lost everything he'd put in it, and had incurred debts besides. And so he was never able to get anything out of that. And then he went to work for Salisbury Hardware and worked until his health failed. And he did a little truck farming and peach orchard, and that was the end of his career.
Now, where did the job at which he was beaten during the robbery?
That was in the produce business.
That was after he'd gone in his own trucking business.
Right. That followed the Salisbury Hardware, didn't it?
Oh yes, see, he worked in the Salisbury Hardware. He was working there when Liv got married in 1930. And then after, he had his mumps and was sick so long, and then he came out from that spell of sickness, he went in trucking immediately, which was about 31.
That's right. He hauled produce for some years before he grew produce. He hauled produce for some years. Then, after he gave up hauling produce, he grew produce and peaches.
When did he get into the peaches? Of course, the peaches were always in by the
actually,
time.
we had peach orchard there, a nice peach orchard, and sold fruit from an orchard when I was a child. But that was not the same orchard, of course, that you would remember.
Because peach trees only last fairly short after.
Right, 15 years or so.
This big orchard of his, he didn't get it going until after his robbery.
Right.
You see, he was robbed in the summer of 1940.
The orchard was something he took up after.
But the peach business was just a natural outgrowth of the produce that he'd been doing for some years before.
Well, and he had grown peaches when I was a youngster even. We had a peach orchard when I was about 12, 14, and sold peaches to the public quite a lot. So peaches was in his background too. He was a good farmer, and he really produced. You've seen his peach trees and how he could make. I mean, not he did it, but I mean he knew how to do them. And he was a good farmer, but he never could seem satisfied with it. But I think one of the basic dissatisfactions of his life, so far as his career was concerned, was because after they were married for 4 years or so, and he had about 3 children, he decided he wanted to go into ministry. And my mother did not agree. He was a good farmer, they owned their home there and so forth. And with a couple of children already, she felt that it was
a harebrained scheme, sort of.
She didn't feel it was the thing to do. And I don't know, I was not even born yet. I don't know exactly. I just caught the residue of the feelings left over from it. And I sensed all my life, and this was until he was an old man, that he always had a bit of resentment there because she did not cooperate with him to enter the ministry. And even in his late years, after he was 80 years old, he would mention that at times, that he wanted to go into ministry, but that our mother didn't agree. And I think there was that, and that may have influenced some of his career decisions and frustrations otherwise. I don't know.
It's hard. I mean, you have to read between the lines.
Right, right. And another thing was the land. You see, he had made the land over to her.
And after she died, he couldn't get access to it.
And then when she died, it was made into the children's, it was the property of the children, and they all, of course, agreed immediately to let him have it as long as he lived. Right. But he couldn't sell it. just
Mhm.
do anything he wanted to except sell it.
Mhm.
And he was never really happy about that.
Is that
Numbers
right?
of times he would say to me, even after he was older and
Mhm.
sick at times and so forth, that he had had real good offers for that property, but he couldn't sell it because it was tied up. He would have sold that land
Oh, he'd have died
before we
broke.
kids were grown had he had the right to do it.
Mhm.
The land would not have been there for the
Yeah.
family to grow
Right.
up on, and that was the reason our mother secured it the way she
Mhm.
did, I feel sure.
Yeah.
There's one thing about Dad that I've forgotten talking about now. We were talking about his carpenter work, but he started, and for years, every Saturday he worked in a store either at Millenport. He worked for David Lippert in the store there, day in and day out. And then he got tied up with Ed Glover in Albemarle. Every Saturday he'd go to Albemarle and work, and he was
What kinds of stores?
general stores,
Mhm.
and he did a good job in it. They liked him.
Mhm.
And he could get all the work in stores he wanted, and that was his supplemental income there for a long time as he got
Mhm.
older.
Yeah.
I remember him going to Albemarle for Ed Glover.
Was he doing that as late as the 1950s, you think?
No, that stopped. He moved into the light place in 1932, and he didn't do too many years after that.
Every time you'd talk to Franklin about his family, they always lived at such and such a place, the Page place, the Light place,
Yeah, it always had a name.
the place. And this puzzled me when I was writing family history about all these places they lived. And I had never heard of a farm called a place up where we lived. So
Maybe that's because people hung on to them.
I had never known sharecroppers. And so I told him when I was writing family history, that explained why their homes were always called such and such a place, Whit Page Place, and so forth. And I had never heard of that in our village. But then, when I got into family history, I was dumbstruck to learn that my grandfather lived on a rented farm until he had had 14 children, and the last of his children were almost grown before he ever owned a farm. I thought all the time that farm, the Eagle Place, had been in the family maybe for generations and did not know any different until I was writing family history, and Jim Eagle told me that he was 16 years old, or no, 1916 I guess it was. It was 19. Which was it?
It was in 1916 when he was 11 years old.
Okay, then Grandpa had not had that many children, but he
This
was
is
married.
Eli you're talking about.
Eli.
Your
had-
grandfather Eli.
Right. He had already married and had a bunch of children living there before he ever even owned it. So my own grandfather lived on a rented farm for some time, and I didn't even know it.
But he did acquire that land.
He did later acquire it. Right.
The land that includes the 6 acres that you have now. Is that,
No,
that
I'm
that
talking
came.
about the Eagles.
Well, now the Eagle. Okay, I don't have a very clear picture of where this Eagle land was. It went back into where John and Kathleen.
John and Kathleen lived on it.
It's the log house
the
just
old
below
house my
them.
grandmother lived in. Grandma
See,
Eagle's
Grandma
house.
died in 1946. You probably don't remember her.
I'm trying to remember where her house was.
Down below John's and Kathleen's, just a stone's throw from John's and Kathleen.
But isn't that just real close to your land?
Yes, yes.
In fact, don't you even
almost
you
joined.
just go on down that
Almost
dirt
joined.
road?
It's not
About
even a
half a
half a
mile.
mile.
Mm-hmm.
The land almost joined. There was a tiny strip between us is all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you see, my grandfather and grandmother, my mother's people, lived there, and I thought that for generations it had been in the family, when in truth it had only been in the family since 1916.
But it
Prior
did not.
to that.
It did not include this land that
No.
that's your father that
No,
came
my
down
father,
to you.
No, that was bought from different.
And it's just
source entirely.
coincidence that it happened to be almost adjacent to it.
Right. Well, I suspect maybe
I mean,
my dad bought it there because he got a good
Right.
opportunity to buy it, and it was next to.
I
where
guess I had in the
my
back of
mother
my mind that land had come down through the Eagles.
lived. No. Mm-mm.
Well, I'll give you a little history on Dad's now. Dad and Mother were married in December of 1908, and they stayed with her daddy, who was living on the Cal Plot place until the fall of 1909.
The plot.
Cal Plot place. And because Cal Plot owned it. Then in the fall of 1909, Dad and Mother moved to the Dan Sides place. It was owned by Dan Sides. That was the fall of 1909. They were living there in March of 1910 when I was born. But he stayed on there till the fall of 1910. he moved to the Whit Page place. Whit Page was a distant cousin of my daddy. So he stayed there for 3 years until the fall of 1913. My sister that died and Isabel were born at that place. That's the Whit Page place. The fall of 1913, he moved to the old ridge, which was owned by George Troutman. And he stayed there from the fall of 1913 to the fall of 1924, which was 11 years. And Esther and Jess and George and Hoyle were all born there on the old ridge place. There was a doctor, I can remember twice, when there was a doctor in that house while we lived there during 11 years. And that was both times when Dad was sick. All of the babies were delivered by a midwife.
Your daddy had a doctor, but your mother had midwives.
She never was sick. Mama, I don't remember her ever being sick. As a matter of fact, she didn't have any aches or pains. And but we stayed there for 11 years. In the fall of 1924, he moved to Millenport. It was another house that was still owned by George Troutman. It was owned by the same landlord, but it was right across the highway from the Millenport School. He stayed there until August of 1926, when he moved to the Frank Leffler place, which was in sight of where he was living. He moved to the Leffler place and stayed there until the fall of 1932, when he moved to the Andy Light place. And that's where he was living when I got married. He moved to the Light place in 1932, and in 1935 there was about 70 acres of land within about a little over half a mile of where he was living that was for sale. And he talked about wanting to buy it, but he didn't have the money because they wanted $800 for that tract of land.
What year was that?
It was in 1935. So he talked to
About $12.
Mr. Hatley, Ulysses' daddy. Ulysses married my sister Isabel. He talked to Mr. Hatley. Mr. Hatley says, if you can buy that tract of land for that money, says, buy it. I'll let you have the money. So he bought that in the summer of 1935. And he stayed on where he was living until the fall of 1940. But during that year of 1940, he started building him a small house on his own land. And he built it and moved there in the fall of 1940 and stayed there till he died.
It's funny. You can remember the date of every car you ever bought, how much you paid for it. You can remember every move your daddy ever made in his lifetime. And I bet you can't tell me the color of the pants you wore yesterday at church.
I wore 2 pair yesterday.
He didn't wear 2 pairs to church, did he?
The pair that I picked out and put on was a kind of a greenish shade now, but you picked out one. I didn't even look what color it was.
Did she make you change?
I've got her broke in.
Did she make you change? Is that what she did?
No, I've got her broke in. Every Sunday morning I tell her, get in there and pick out the clothes you want me to wear today. I don't have to worry about it. I just put on what she lays out.
Well, I found out it was simpler than to make him, after he got dressed, to tell him that things were wrong and he'd have to change one or the other. So it's simpler just to go in there and
She is
lay them
wondering
out.
what'll happen if she dies first.
No telling what he'll put together to wear.
Well, I mean, he's with him starting out wearing a checkered shirt to your wedding.
Couldn't wonder. Couldn't wonder.
The checky shirt, it was a polka
It was a
dot.
houndtooth check.
Well, whatever.
A houndtooth check is not a straight check. It's a zigzaggy check.
That was a.
And it was a very popular check in that time. And
Yeah,
later,
that
too.
shirt caught my eye when I first saw it there at Belk's department store in Elmore. I think it cost me 98 cents. I believe that's what it was. The suit cost me $14, and I've forgotten what the shirt cost.
You know, all the names of these places where your folks lived. Now, some of those places we have pictures of.
The first 2 that Dad lived, you don't, because they were torn down before you ever came on the scene. Now, I never saw the Dan Sides place because it was torn down before I ever got there. I did see the place where he was living and Isabel was born, but it was torn down before you and I got there. Now, you saw the old ridge. That's the house that was getting very shackly. And you saw the one at Millenport that he first moved in.
That's where he just lived for 2 years, right?
Uh-huh. And you saw the one at the Lefflers where he lived there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that was torn down. That may have been torn down before you ever got in there to see it and make pictures.
You'd know if you saw the pictures.
We need to go back over
I
those
don't think you
pictures.
have a picture of that. But you do have a picture of the one he moved to when he left Lefflers, where he lived there owned by Andy Light. And then, of course, you have the one of his own home that he built.
I remember on the pictures I have one picture of you and Nelson standing by, it was a big tree, and you were talking about a house that had been at that site.
Was that the one where Granddaddy was living when Dad was married? That house was torn down and there was some big trees there. That's where I fell in the spring. Richard pulled me out.
I believe that is the place.
You know, my parents had a spring when they first, Franklin's parents had to carry water, and goodness knows every place. And as long as Grandma Page lived, she wouldn't use much water. After she got running water in her kitchen and everything, why, she just couldn't get used to wasting water, because she always came back with the saying, well, she remembered when she used to have to carry water way up the hill, you know. But my parents had a spring to start with, but then they had a well bored.
Well, there's one thing scares me now more than it did then. At the old ridge where Dad moved in 1913, out as far from the house, maybe as far as near our driveway, was a dug well that had been dug about 20-some feet deep, and it always had some water in it. And there wasn't a thing in the world protecting us kids from that well except slabs just piled out on over the hole.
If LeVon had been there, he'd have been
And
falling
we
in the
lived
first
there from 1913 to 1922.
And nobody ever fell in the well.
And nobody ever fell in it. We knew to stay off of that, but
it's amazing you did.
Right.
But it's enough to it scares me now. But we filled that thing up about well, we had to carry all our water from a spring from 1913 to 1922. In the summer of 1922, they drilled a well there. It had to go 78 feet to get water and drill the well. Didn't have a pump to it, but it had one of these long buckets that water runs out the bottom. Had a valve in the bottom. It's a bored well, 6-inch hole. And that's the first time we ever had water close by. That was right at the back door.
When did you have this well here put in?
50, somewhere around 1950.
You got well from Elam before then?
I had a pipe from Mr. Elam's well here. I paid him $1.35 a month.
I remember vaguely when that water was piped in.
What number it is? Jesus love on my soul. We're going to sing something for you. When our parents
What did you say? Jesus?
were young, and I can remember my mother standing at the wash tub and singing. My grandmother, you see, our houses were close enough together. We could hear our grandmother at times when the wind was just right. We could hear our grandmother out at the barn calling her cows.
Well, you talked about hearing your grandfather praying in the field.
That was my grandfather's brother.
That was?
My great uncle praying in the field. Yes.
That wasn't Eli. It was, what's the name of the
Eli's brother, Will.
Will.
And he owned a little strip between us and Grandpa Eagle. The little bit of land that was owned between us belonged to his brother, Will. And we would hear Will. And of course, Will was praying to the neighborhood. He wasn't praying to God. But he'd get down on his knees behind the plow. He'd stop the horse and get down on his knees behind the plow. And he would pray so loud that the whole village could hear him. Very, very distinctly. But then when the wind was just right, we could hear my grandmother down at her place, either calling the cows. She was a great cow caller. Sioux cow, or at times we could hear her singing even. She had a very strong voice and a right melodious voice. But then, my mother, when she on wash days, when she'd out in the yard, the washing was done in the yard under the tree, with a wash bench and a tin tub and a washboard, and she would sing a lot when she washed. And a lot of times they would sing the shapes instead of the words.
Shape note singing.
Right, and they instead of saying the words, they would say the shapes.
Yeah.
And we're going to do one for you.
Okay, good.
This one, Jesus, lover of my soul.
Right.
Okay, let me just back off.
Me, 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 do, re, re, re. Me, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Me, do, re, re, re. Me, sol, fa, mi.
numbers of hymns by, they'd sing the note, you see, is what they were doing instead of using words. And
They know them by heart.
right, and they would sing them like that instead of using words. I guess they learned them that way to learn the melody, and so they'd sing them that way.
That is what was called shape note singing, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, in The Sound of Music, Julie did one number.
Yeah.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do.
Yeah.
But she put it to the tune and The Sound of Music.
Well, you take back in my young days, you see, the Primitive Baptist does not have a musical instrument in the church of any kind. And there was a preacher, Jones, he was a Primitive Baptist preacher, would conduct singing schools. And Dad liked to attend them, and I did too. I went with him. And the only thing that this preacher had, he had a tuning fork to get the note, the beginning note. And he could take a song that he had never seen before with those shaped notes and sing that thing. If he got his pitch to start it.
Not long after Mother and Dad were married, they had a training school in the church there at Liberty, and a Lentz man from down in Cabarrus County came up to teach us.
Training school?
Music.
Music training school.
Right, with the shaped notes. And my dad went with Mother, and he tried to sing, and the instructor listened to him a few nights, and finally he said, "Chalmers, you can't sing, and you never will sing." And my daddy never tried again to sing.
That's awful. Completely discouraged him from
I
ever
don't
trying
ever
to sing.
remember him singing. And my mother would tell us what happened at the training school. That was the time at which he quit singing completely.
That's awful.
Mm. I guess one reason that Daddy and I got married and yet are nearly, 3.5 years apart in age is that I was so much further advanced in school than I was supposed to be. So I was only 1 year behind him in school. But
Now, were you ahead of?
I was ahead of my age level. What happened, I was so crazy about books, and I had 4 older brothers and sisters. So before I was school age, I had learned to read. And it wasn't that anybody had tried to teach me, but I just loved all the kids' school books, and I was always having them to read to me and so forth. So the first day I went to school, the teacher opened the primer. Back then we had a primer grade and then a first grade. The primer preceded first grade like kindergarten does now. So the first day I went to school, the teacher opened the primer, and I read everything. She'd turn the page and I'd keep reading until we'd read through the book. And she looked astounded and gave me a first grade book. And she proceeded with the first grade book, and I read through the first grade book. So before I finished 1 year of school, I was finished with the primer, first and second grades. And I don't know to this day whether I was really reading or whether I was just quoting my memory, you know, from hearing my brothers and sisters read it. All I know is that I didn't have any trouble. I went on and kept up with the grade all the time, and didn't have any trouble keeping up. So that put me to at least 2 years ahead of where I should have been in school. Therefore, I was always associated with kids 2 to 3 years older than I.
Now, what about your older brothers? Did they, were they ahead in school also?
No, I was the only one in the family that was ahead of my own age level. As a matter of fact, by the time they finished high school, they were a bit below their level of where kids would normally finish now. But then we only had 7 grades there in the village, 2-room school. The first teacher, one teacher taught the first 4 grades, and the other 5, 6, and 7. And if a child did not want to finish school, stop school at the end of 7 grades, they just came on and came on and came on.
Maybe take one subject.
And some of them sometimes would take nothing but math or something like that. But they had the privilege of coming on. And my father went to school till he was around 20, but he was still in 7th grade because there was no place for him to go, and he wanted to stay in school. But I've heard my grandmother Eagle say that when she went to school, they only went about 3 months of the year. In the midwinter, when there was not much else to do, even in midwinter, farm families had a lot to do then because they had their clothing to make, the cotton to spin, thread to spin, and the cloth to weave, and things of that sort. So she went to school about 3 months of the year when she was little. And then by the time I went, it was 6 months of the year. Our school year was 6 months.
Yeah.
But then when I finished 7th grade, there was no public school in my area available to me. The only way that you could go past beyond 7th grade was to pay your way and go to a boarding school or transport yourself to a city school, which we were unable to do. So it was at the first 5 children in our family of 8, the first 5 went down to Mitchell Home School, a Methodist operated high school. Well, it was a primary and high school at that time. In order to go any further than 7th grade, we had to live down there. And then when the 6th child in the family, the last 3 children in the family were finishing 7th grade, there had been consolidated high schools built with bus facilities. So the last 3 members of the family were transported by bus to public schools.
And that was Gertrude, Norman, and Pearl.
Right.
She gained 2 years. I lost 2 years. And the reason I lost mine, going to this two teacher school out in the country where the one teacher had the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. My first year in the 4th grade, I liked it. I didn't want to change rooms, so I just spent another year in the 4th grade. And went on through. Well, there I lost 1 year. Then my last 3 years at Millenport, when they had 8th, 9th, and 10th grades in high school, they only had a 6-month school, and the county wouldn't let you pass unless you had at least 8 months. So what they had to do is take 3 years for 2 grades. And I lost another year, so I was 19 when I finished.
I see.
But my sister, I had 2 sisters, one sister 2 years older than I, another 4 years older than I. And my sister Lib and I graduated together. I caught her, and we graduated in the same class, but my sister Nellie, who was 4 years older than I, had fallen back, and I finished high school 1 year ahead of
Nellie.
of Nellie, who was 4 years older than I. I finished 1 year ahead of her.
Now, what year did you finish high school?
1930.
And what year did your mother die?
1929. She died this summer in August before I went back for my senior year of high school. And that's the first time in my life that I ever really had problems in school academically. I had never had, except for a little bit of math or something occasionally, I had never had any academic problems until the beginning of my senior year. And I think it was just that I couldn't concentrate, couldn't keep my mind on what I was doing. And I had some problems the first year.
So what was going on there at the home that year?
Well, my mother died in August of 1929, and Elizabeth and Nell and I had neither finished high school. We were due to, Lib and I were due to finish that year, the next year, and Nellie had 2 years to go yet. So Elizabeth dropped out of the home, and I mean, she didn't quit school, but she lived at home at Liberty. Nellie and I went on back to Mitchell as boarding students. Lib stayed at home and held the kiddies together and did what little housekeeping was done, and rode with another family from the area down as day students back and forth.
So she commuted for that year?
She commuted, but she had to walk about 2 miles morning and 2 miles in the evening to get to her car ride, and that was all kinds of weather. I never realized until a few years ago just how much Lib put up with that year, you know, how difficult her situation was, trying to take care of 3 smaller children and commute 4 miles on foot.
Was there not a bicycle in the family?
A girl did not own a bicycle in that day and time. A girl's bicycle. I wanted a bicycle so bad. That's why Daddy bought me one after we got married. I had always wanted a bicycle. Never got it out of my system. Harvey and Fred had bicycles all their lives. Boys had bicycles. a girl owning a bicycle was unheard of. And that, I look back on that as being one of the worst sex discriminations that I have ever experienced in my life, was the fact that because I was a girl, I didn't have a bicycle.
Well, what was happening? Did Fred and Harvey still own bicycles at the time that Lib was walking to school all that time?
I don't think there were any bicycles on the place
No,
by that
yes.
time.
Well, they were both in Duke, weren't they? Didn't Fred and
Oh, they were gone,
Yeah.
but he asked
Mhm.
about the
Oh,
bicycle.
yeah.
Now, I was just wondering if there wasn't a bicycle
Not that I
available
know
that she
of.
could.
Not that I know of. And no girl in the family ever had a bicycle, and Lib trudged it on foot in all kinds of weather.
Now, where was the money coming from to keep Harvey and Fred in Duke at this time?
That was largely on their own.
They were kind of working. Harvey
Harvey.
worked a paper route.
Harvey worked the whole time he was there
Mm-hmm.
and was fully self-supporting.
Fred only spent, was it 1 or 2 years there? I know not over 2.
2, I think.
And then he quit and got married.
Mm-hmm.
But the money situation in our family was desperate from the time our mother died. Actually, we never suffered for food or anything like that as long as my mother lived.
Yeah.
But she always was able to manage, and she had chickens and cows, and we always had eggs and milk and butter and bread and that sort of thing. But and then after she died, you see, Dad started trucking and left home.
Mm-hmm.
And he was lots of times, also Lib left at the end of her senior year. She got married and left home. So that left just Nell and Gertrude and Pearl and Norman and me there. Well, Nellie, for some reason, did not know how to carry any responsibility and never did.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a matter of a bunch of kids living together, and Dad would be gone a week at a time. Most of the time, he was be home for Saturday night and Sunday night, Sunday and Sunday night, and that was it.
Mhm.
He was gone the whole rest of the week, and we just did the best we could. But there were times we had very little to eat besides biscuits
Mm-hmm.
and maybe dry beans, potatoes, and whatever we could find under the apple trees and scraggly fruit trees. After Mother died, the cows, wasn't long until the cows were gone, the chickens dwindled. My daddy did not do anything to help hold the place together.
Right.
I'd say practically nothing.
Yeah.
Well, his
And-
mind was on his trucking.
But your mother had pretty much anticipated that before she died, hadn't
Well, I
you?
think that
Okay.
was probably back of her wanting the land made in her
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
So actually, I think one of the worst deprivations that I ever knew was lack of a decent diet
Yeah.
and lack of medical care during the years between 15 and 21, along about there, because we actually did not have the money to go to a dentist. If we had a cavity in a tooth, it just went. We didn't have the money to go to a dentist. And our diet was atrocious, and it was at that point that I developed allergies. I don't say that it was diet that did it, but I think there's a good chance it could have been,
Mm-hmm.
because our diet was so devoid of vitamins and minerals. It was so much starch and so little else for so long that it could have been.
Yeah. Did you have much resentment towards Harvey and Fred, do you think, for their not
No.
having helped out more during that period?
No, I never had any resentment towards anybody, but I learned just recently that Nellie had a resentment when we were in Florida. She didn't so much express it against Harvey or Fred as against the other members of the family, aunts and uncles.
I
And
see.
it never occurred to me.
Of course, Nellie was the oldest one of you that stayed home.
Yes,
But she didn't take any
She
responsibility.
didn't take responsibility. She didn't even assume the responsibility for cooking or washing or.
She seems to hardly be the one to hold resentments.
But I just was talking to her about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was sort of astounded to learn that she sort of held some resentments, especially towards Aunt Minnie and Uncle Walter and couples which she thought were in good shape financially and should have helped. We got very
Well,
little help
normally
from
they
anybody.
would have helped if they had been conscious of it, but then.
Well,
they
now
just-
wait a minute. This was during the Depression. Many of them were doing all they could to keep their families together. My
Yeah.
Uncle Bill lost his home in the Depression. Just you see, my mother died in 29, and the Depression followed for 6 or 8 years so severely. My Uncle Bill lost his own home. Well, what could he do about a sister's kids who had a hard time? He'd lost his own home. And most of them were just barely making ends meet.
Let's see, that's Bill and Minnie, is that right?
Bill and Mary.
Bill and Mary.
Bill died.
Minnie was Walter's wife.
Right.
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 But Bill did used to be at Park Avenue.
Right. He
Yeah.
came back. He was gone for years to the shipbuilding
Yeah.
yards. And
Yeah.
back. Yeah. But no, I never did. Harvey did help one summer. He had was working his way at Duke, and he came home one summer. And when Dad was sick, and he told me, said, "Now you can go to the store. I've arranged with Mr. Earnhardt, who was running the store at that time. Says I have arranged with him for you to buy certain things, and I told him that if the family never got the bill paid, I'd pay for it. So we always had the right to buy flour and sugar, I think, you know, several basic items. And Harvey did that. But no way, I never felt any resentment at anybody because most folks were just barely making ends meet.
Well, I was wondering if you know, you were a girl and they were the two boys off in college, if it had been, you know, if they had been girls and you were a boy, would things have fallen?
No, I just sort of assumed that the age they were, it was normal for them to leave home, and that those of us who were there, it was normal for us to be there, and it really never crossed my mind to expect them to come home or anything of that sort. I do remember one Christmas when we were in pretty desperate straits. Uncle Dolph Morgan and Orrin, his son, came out on Christmas Eve and left a bunch of stuff on the porch. They knocked at the door and then ran so that
They didn't plan to be seen, in other words.
no,
Yeah. Where Dolph Morgan, where does that fit in now?
His
He is
wife
my
was a
mother's
sister to
brother.
her mother.
my mother's sister's husband, you know, where they lived there on the square in Liberty at the church.
Big two-story house on the right, just before you turn out towards Liberty.
You
That's
know
where
my
they're
Aunt
from.
Carrie.
Sure,
Well, Aunt Carrie. It's her husband.
I
Of course,
see.
he's been dead for quite a time.
Yeah. What year do you suppose that was?
That would have been, my daddy was sick in 30, wasn't he? It would have been the Christmas of 1930. Because my dad was sick that year, and I was trying to. It would have been the Christmas of.
Probably,
29 or
probably
30.
no, it'd have been Christmas of 30.
Yeah, I guess it would have. That was the year Dad was sick, wasn't it?
Because he didn't get
Right.
sick till the summer of 30.
Right. It would have been the Christmas of 1930. And they ran, but I don't know how we learned they're the ones who left the food there, although they did run. Then there was another person who was some help to us too, Mrs. Joe Lance. Do you remember her?
Where'd they live?
Myrtle's mother and Pauline's mother lived way back down in there. I guess you just don't know. Anyway,
She was Minnie Eagle's sister. Walter White's
she
sister.
lived in the village across the other side from my mother, and they were real good friends. My mother and Mrs. Lentz were very good friends, and we were real good friends with her children. So it was we had visited a lot and so forth. After my mother died, Mrs. Lentz came out and helped us make clothes to go to school. There was no such thing as going to the store and buying clothes. We had never owned a piece of bought clothing in our lives except overcoats. I think we did have a few overcoats in the family, winter coats that were bought. Other than that, we did not own a bought garment. We had to make everything we wore. And so Mrs. Lentz told us that summer that immediately after our mother died, that if we had any cloth, and she had some cloth she'd help us with, that she'd come out and help us make our school clothes. And she did. She spent several days out there sewing and making school clothes for us to go back to school. Those are the only instances I remember of help, you know, in a personal way or anything from anybody. But then I wasn't expecting it, so I...
You know, one difference that always seemed to me between the two circumstances was you grew up right there in sort of a community. I mean, there was
Right.
Liberty, there was a school, there was the church,
Franklin was much
and a
more
store.
isolated.
and I never did sense just what the home situation there where you grew up revolved around. I mean, if you wanted to go to, where was the closest store?
Ed Leffler run a little country grocery store, which would have been, roughly speaking, around a mile from home.
Mm-hmm.
And if Mama needed something, well, she'd maybe send me off to the store.
How far are you saying?
It's about a mile.
Mm-hmm.
And then Millenport had a couple stores, and Millenport was between 2 and 3 miles.
Mm-hmm.
I remember on various occasions, Dad had put me on the old mule, send me to Millenport, maybe to pick up something they needed.
Mm-hmm.
Or I remember during World War I, in the late teens, it was kind of, you had trouble getting sugar. And you couldn't change stores. If you had been buying from a store, you had to stick with it.
Uh-huh.
And I went.
Was it rationed or just that they wouldn't sell it to anybody except
They
the
just
regular
didn't have
customers?
it, and it was
When
not
they-
supposed to be sold.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly what the details, but anyway, I remember going to Ed Leffler's store and getting some sugar, and the stuff was about 30-some cents a pound, which was an atrocious price.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know sugar was ever short till the Second World War.
There was a little precariousness about it in World War I.
A lot of the childhood treats we got, although we didn't get many, but if we got any, it was usually a barter situation. The local store where my father worked, a lot of their trade was barter. It was
Mhm.
not cash.
Mm-hmm.
The farmers would bring in staple vegetables, not fresh vegetables. They couldn't handle fresh, but they'd bring in staple.
You mean the store
vegetables.
couldn't handle
The
it?
store, right? They
Didn't
didn't
have
have
any
refrigeration.
Yeah.
But farmers would bring in sweet potatoes, Irish potatoes, grain, or eggs particularly. A lot of eggs were used for barter.
Mm-hmm.
And we children, in order to get a little spending money, Mama would let us have an egg now and then
Mm-hmm.
to go to the trade store to barter for something, and we'd of course get candy.
So
But-
you could barter with just one egg.
Yes, so we would, every time we could pester Mother into giving us an egg or so, we'd light out for the store and trade for a few little pieces of candy, you know.
Yeah, they had
Or-
penny candy then.
Mm-hmm.
Or we would dig, was it arrowroot, some sort of roots, dock. We would dig dock roots and wash them and lay them out in the sun to dry. And they were used for medical purposes of some sort, I don't know what. And we'd take those to the store and barter for anything we wanted. The merchant would buy the roots.
Mm-hmm.
And rabbit skins, my brothers would use rabbit skins.
Mhm.
Skin the rabbit and stretch the hide out good and
Mhm.
dry it, and trade a rabbit skin would bring a certain amount of cash.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of our family as well as children's barter was done in, trading was done in barter rather than cash.
You know, I understand there's still a good market for witch hazel.
Is
I
that
have a
right?
friend who spends time in the mountains and he has trouble with people coming
But the
cutting
difference,
cutting
one
all
of
the
the
witch hazel.
differences now is though they sell this to somebody rather than barter it for something else.
That's
where
right.
we weren't handling any money at all.
In fact, I
It's
think
just
the
a matter-
main purchasers I think are Japanese for the witch hazel.
In many instances, cash was not handled. It's just eggs were the big thing, though. Basket of eggs and go to the grocery.
You're in good shape.
Cash was about the unknown quantity.
Mm-hmm. But there around Liberty, there must have been, how many families lived within half a mile of that main square in Liberty? At least 20 or 30, didn't
Oh,
it?
no.
Not that many.
No. Most of those have grown up since. My grandmother, later John and Kathleen, they weren't even there to start with, and us, the house on the corner at Liberty, my Uncle Doff's, the Shaver home, and the Campbells.
Was
I'd
Lintz's,
say-
was Joe Lentz,
They weren't right in the
Earnhardt.
village.
Yep.
No, the Earnhardts moved in later, so did John Lentz. The old Frick home was there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It'd be under 12. Right in the village. under a dozen.
Hmm.
But still enough that you felt a cluster effect, you know. And particularly with the church and school next door. I think the church and school being next door made it,
How many families you think would come into that church on a Sunday?
families.
Or just how many people? How many people would you have?
Over
How
30
many,
families.
how many
or
people
so.
would you have in the congregation on Sunday? 100 maybe? Back when you were
I
a
wouldn't
kid?
think over that.
Hmm.
Maybe not that much. But the church people came for several miles. It was
Yeah.
more than just the immediate
Sure.
village. They came in by wagon and
Sure,
buggies and so forth.
sure.
Hey, you were in church so little when you were little. I've heard you tell about your going when the preacher was trying to get folks to come to the altar one night at a Baptist church of some sort with your grandfather, were you? And you saw him coming back towards you.
I'm thinking of my granddaddy now.
Oh, your granddaddy.
Yeah, Mama's daddy, granddaddy, was in a church. It was in the summertime
At a revival meeting.
at a revival, and he was sitting on next to the outside aisle. The window was just beyond him, and it was about 10 feet from that window to the ground. And there was one old sister, she got so happy. She was shouting and hugging and kissing people. And she started back the aisle towards the seat on which he was sitting. Of course, he was over next to the wall. She was in the middle aisle. And he made up his mind that about the time she hit his seat, if she started coming in there, he was going to be gone. So he watched her, and she came back the aisle. When she got to his seat, she started to him, and poof, out to the window he went.
Now, who was that? That was
My granddaddy, mother's daddy.
your granddaddy.
That was
Don.
back in his days. He was a pretty wild character. He did an awful lot of drinking, and he'd get. I've heard Mama speak about seeing him getting drunk and run through the orchards and just grab every tree and try to shake it as he went through, just as drunk as a fiddler. But he quit drinking when he got up about past 50, and when he died, he had told Mama. He says, "If it's a matter of life or death, as far as liquor is concerned, I don't want any of it regardless." He was 65 years old when he joined the church.
Hmm.
And
Did he join that Methodist church that
no,
you're...
he joined the Baptist church. Yeah. The Mission Baptist Church. I don't guess you've ever seen Mission Baptist Church. I know we've been there several times, but not with you. Yeah, he joined when he was 65.
What was the name of that church where your daddy's funeral was?
That was Bear Creek.
Bear Creek.
Now, the Mission Baptist Church is what's called a missionary Baptist. They have instruments, musical instruments, even some Cracker Jack singing. Now, the primitive Baptists where Dad was, they don't have a musical instrument in the church at all.
Right. And as I recall, at his funeral, there was no musical instruments.
And the men sit in one corner up in the amen corner, and the women on the other side. They won't mix.
This is a change of subject, but in what way do you think that we're well adjusted or alike, and in what way do you think that we're rather poorly adjusted or mismatched?
You mean from the beginning, or just things that have
it's pretty well
evolved?
sifts down over the years. You know, personality traits.
Well, I don't see too much in the way of misadjustments, but what we've been able to come through it.
No, it's been fine, but there are certain things, you know, about you that are so different from me.
Well,
One-
you have more complaint against peculiarities that I have than I have complaints against you.
He is so retiring, you know. He's such a retiring person. He won't push himself on anybody or anything. And we've been traveling already, and he would drive 15 miles and around 20 blocks before he'd ask anybody, you know, how to get to any place or anything of that sort.
We never
And
have
I-
been completely lost.
I always just butt in anywhere, you know, and ask anything in that respect. And woman says Thurman aggravates the life out of her the same way. He's just a very retired.
They get along pretty good.
Another difference of personality is, although it doesn't cause any friction, if there's something that needs to be done, I want to do it today.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's any way in the world it can be done tomorrow instead of today.
Not all the time, but part of the time.
What's the idea in doing it today? It can be
As
done
long as
tomorrow.
it's not an emergency, huh?
I have chores that I had when I retired. I wanted to get them done, and they're not all done yet. That's just been 11 years, so give me time.
It
I'm
always,
afraid time's going to run out. No, I'm not.
it always gives you
Whether
something
get
to
any
look
more-
forward to.
Whether you get any more done or not doesn't really matter to me, except the things that I want you to do, and I'll see that those get done.
I got a lot of junk I got to clean up around the cabin and so forth. I was just telling Levon today, though, that if I don't get it done, well, he and Nelson can have a scrap heap over it when they start cleaning up.
Another thing that big difference is that I like to discard things that I'm through with, and he likes to hold on to everything.
Well, you've always illustrated that with the fingernail clippers story.
He doesn't believe in letting anything go.
Well, do you and Joe have any contrast in that angle? Which ones to throw away and which ones to keep?
I believe they both keep.
We both tend to keep, but keep in a very unorganized fashion.
They both like to keep, so it shows.
No, I've told her I thought that we were about equally disorganized, but that we have a difference in that I always like things to be well, whenever I make any attempt to organize, it's always so I'll understand where things are better and be able to find them. Visual clutter doesn't bother me at all.
It's the
Whereas-
fact that you want it handy.
That's right. In her case, her organization will always be to cut down on visual clutter by just throwing things in drawers. So we have
that
disputes of
that
that
doesn't help
type.
much.
Yeah.
You go after it.
You know, I don't mind to have all kinds of things sitting out if they're just sitting out at a place where I know how to get to them and it's not in the way.
In fact, if you had room to have them all sitting out, there wouldn't be any point in putting them up with her.
That's right.
Well, making decisions is always a pain for me. Deciding whether to buy something or whether to change something or trade. I dread the thoughts of trying to buy an automobile.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and for years and years, he kept saying that I wanted to make all the decisions. I made all the decisions. So finally, some years back, I decided I was going to quit making all the decisions, and I had the awfulest time getting him to make any decisions. And I found out he was merely using that as a gimmick, that he really wanted me to make the decisions,
Yeah.
but at the same time, he wanted the freedom to
complain
about
yeah.
me making the decisions.
Well, that's one reason I find it so easy when I go to dress on Sunday morning. I don't have to make a decision.
So when he asks me something now, I say, suit yourself. That's the last answer in the world he wants to hear. Suit yourself. And he doesn't care a thing about suiting himself. He just wants to know how it should be done or how to do it. It's getting to where when we have the extreme snows and sleets, it makes me nervous. Franklin's the patriarch of his family now, and most of his ancestors have been buried during snowstorms, sleet storms, and rainstorms.
And they all seemed real severe, right?
Right.
Was the snow and sleet really worse back then, or does it just seem that way?
Well, actually, you know, his father, and this has not been too many years, his father and mother were buried in snow and sleet.
I remember both of those.
Well, go back to January of 1930 when Grandpa Page died. He had been living with Adam and Esther ever since Grandma died in June of 1927.
Now, he died in that house that had the big chimney, is that right?
When he died in January of 1930, it was a ferocious snowstorm, Matter of fact, Mother was there, and she had to get a guy with a mule and buggy to bring her home because the snow was so bad. And on the day of the funeral, we put the chains on Dad's T-model to get around, and it was about, I'd say, 2 miles from where he was living, from where he was to the church. And the question was, were we going to be able to get there? And could Doc Jones, the preacher that was expected to conduct the funeral, could he get there? And a while before the funeral, when there was some question as to whether the preacher would get there, Dad asked me if I could take over and maybe say a few words, that we could call it a funeral and get by. But the preacher Jones started. He got about 300 yards of the church, and his T-model slid in the ditch. But he walked on the balance to get there. But that is the worst funeral I've ever attended weather-wise.
Had to walk the last 300 yards.
Ooh, we just took a hike and I'm about to burn up. What killed most of the people in your family? What was the immediate cause of death?
Grandmother, when she died in June of 27, she was short but rather excessively heavy. She was heavy for her height. And she had been hoeing and working in the garden or a field and was stricken with something. We never did know what it was, but I think it was a stroke that killed her.
What year?
I don't remember. I was only 17 years old and we lived quite a ways from it. I probably heard it at the time, but I don't remember. But I don't think she lived very long.
What year was that?
June of 1927.
And your dad had strokes?
And I don't know what killed Granddaddy. Of course, Granddaddy, let's see, he was born in 53 and died. He was 83 years old.
Yeah. But most of your ancestors did live to be elderly, didn't it?
Yes, Grandmother was born in 52 and died in 1927, so that made her up in her 70s. Granddad was born in 53 and died in 1930. And Dad was born in 83 and died in 65.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they had strokes, it was at a time of life when
they lived a rather long life.
Rare. But so many of my people died of cancer.
I don't know of a single cancer case in the whole Page generation.
Well, my father's people just went off with, died with cancer like a plague. In fact, my father and one sister are the only ones who lived past middle age. His sisters and brothers all died of cancer. And then my mother's people even died of cancer.
But much older.
But much older age.
Mm-hmm.
They did not die prematurely.
Right.
They were along about the normal age.
Well, I can't think of a single incidence of cancer in either my daddy's or my mother's immediate families or close by either.
And what year did Selina James die?
1900.
I'm thinking that I remember your mother talking about the day that Selina died. Do you remember ever hearing her discuss that?
That was your mother's grandmother, wasn't it?
It was Grandpa Dunn's mother. And I don't know what killed her. She was born in 1827 and died in 1900, which means she'd have been 73 years old. She's the one whose husband was killed in South Carolina in the Civil War, and she never did give up believing what he would come home someday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, back along about that period, I've heard Franklin's mother say that just getting enough to eat took all the energy that people, time and energy that people had.
Now that's the period around the turn of the century you're talking about.
Well, during the
back to the Civil War.
To the Civil War, and they didn't always have enough to eat then. But their main energies and time was spent just getting enough to exist on to eat.
Well, you take there was Selina that her husband was killed in the Civil War, and she had there's about 5 or 6 children to look after. See, Granddaddy was born in 59. He was only 6 years old when the Civil War ended.
Your mother told me would cook and get up and leave the table and not eat in order that the children might have enough to sort of satisfy their hunger at times, that she would even go without eating after she cooked a meal to keep the children going.
Now, Salina actually raised your mother, didn't she?
Yeah, As you see,
Your grandmother died in childbirth, is that right?
yeah, she died in 1892. See, Grover was born in the early part of 92, and she died when he was just 4 weeks old.
Mm-hmm.
I only remember a doctor coming to our house during my young years, I'd say, well, even up to the time I was married. I only remember a doctor coming to our house one time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there may have been other times, but I only remember once, and that was during the great flu epidemic of 1918. That was a terrific
That's the flu that killed so many people.
Right. And it was in my family. I did not have it, but some members of the family had it, and we had the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember standing outside the front door because it was such an occasion. When the doctor came, it was...
Did he have to come from Salisbury?
No, well, there was a doctor at that time at Gold Hill, and
which is a little closer than
had to ride a
Salisbury.
buggy.
Mm-hmm.
He was a horse and buggy doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it was 4 miles
Mm-hmm.
from Gold Hill. Of course, he went much longer distances than that, but we were 4 miles from.
Mm-hmm.
And he came, and our mother told us to stay outside, so we stayed outside the front door while the doctor was inside seeing somebody, and it was just as dramatic as it would be now to go to the hospital and go in the emergency room with
Mm-hmm.
emergency surgery with somebody, you know.
Mm-hmm. So you all had the flu at once?
I didn't get it. We didn't all have it,
Mm-hmm.
but some people, I don't remember which members of the family had it, but it was pretty severe. To call a doctor, you knew it was really severe.
Mm-hmm. Trip to a doctor or a dentist was a rarity back then, wasn't it?
Oh yes, I didn't have a dentist amount to anything until after I was married.
I remember Daddy telling me about one time he had to go to the dentist and get 15 cavities.
Well, that was free.
That's why you got it, because it was free.
Yeah, I was about 12 years old.
I didn't have any chance of any free ones.
Yeah.
Why was that one free?
The dentist was in Albemarle, and there were days set up, and he would take care of county students.
I see.
Through the
Yeah.
school system,
Uh-huh.
wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And Dad took me down on a Friday,
Mm-hmm.
and it so happened that the doctor wasn't busy. He remarked afterwards that had he been busy, he wouldn't have taken time to have done all he did for me.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't busy, and he said he seemed like I held up mighty good to it. He just
That
kept
was,
working.
How many did he do?
I think it was 6 fillings.
Six.
That was a really sort of a progressive movement for that day and age,
Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
for children who couldn't afford it.
Sure.
But I never had that sort of a break, so I had a lot of cavities.
You just had to go untreated.
That went untreated until I was about grown. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I said that I hadn't have a doctor. I think I had a shot for, well, I can't even think of the name of the trouble now. But I remember that I had on a pair of overalls, and the doctor unbuttoned it and pulled my, it's diphtheria.
Mm-hmm.
Pulled my pants down and give me a pop in the butt.
Well, a lot of shots were given at school in those days.
He came to the house, Doc Whitley at Millenport, came to the house and gave me a shot for diphtheria.
They would set up a clinic in a school, and for one day they would be giving typhoid shots,
Mm-hmm.
and the neighborhood would go in and take their typhoid shots. It was typhoid a lot then, rather than other shots.
Yeah, back in the 20s there was a lot of typhoid. Every 3 or 4 years there'd be a series of typhoid shots.
Typhoid in summertime.
And you had to take 3 shots.
Mm-hmm.